Okay, I'll start off with the sponsors, and then we'll pick up. Hopefully, the other guys will be on, most of them by then. Okay. The Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avramea ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Joe Yosef ben Chaim. Month of Learning, sponsored by Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya Bas Rab Beryl, and her father, Aram ben Yosef Mordechai. Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka Bas Baruch, and sister Golda Leah Bas David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah bat Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda Bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha Bas Moshe. Ruth Burian and Judy and Edward Boehm, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bat Azriel Zelig Miriam, and father Yitzchak ben Yosef for Esther. A Week of Learning by Harry and Myra Wild, in memory of his father Shraga ben Yecheskel. Also by Mark and Catherine Linder, in memory of his father Chaim ben Yecheskel Eli Melech. Today being the 11th, we have A Day of Learning by Sharon Sittner, in memory of her father Yosef Mordechai ben Yaakov Leib, by David and Ann Klar, in memory of his mother Zizel bat Rav Moshe Asher Zelig, by Aliza Poleyev, in memory of her brother Yerachmiel Dan ben Avraham Yitzchak Halevi, and by Mel Grossman, in memory of his wife Rachel Bas Moshe. May Shamas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velta Yeshir, Shema Tzliah, and L'chol B'nai Israel, a good gebenched yar. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started, all right? And hopefully the other guys will be joining in shortly. Okay, I want to go back to Pei Aleph, Amud Beis, okay, where the Gemara started. Okay, remember there it was asking a question we said on the first part of the Mishnah. Okay, and he said, Rabbi Yossi, that it was to embarrass those who didn't, because they would burn it there in the Azara, but not on the Mizbeach, and therefore embarrass them, that they should have checked to see the Korban Pesach was Tameh or not. Right? Then it went on, Nitma miuto v'chule. Okay, and they raised this contradiction. V'chein mi sheyatza miYerushalayim, one who traveled outside Jerusalem. V'nizkar sheyesh biyado basar kodesh, he's got consecrated meat with him. Im avar tzofim, right? Sorfu b'mkomo. If he passed already Har Tzofim on the and environs of Jerusalem, he should burn it at that location. Ve'im lav, and if not, we said on top of Pei Bet, Chozer v'sorfo lefnei habira. He should come back and burn it again in the temple precinct, but not on the Mizbeach, me'etzei ha'ma'aracha, from the wood that's there in the arrangement, usually for the Mizbeach. And then we finished up. Amarach Chama bar Ukva, he said, Lo kasha, there's really no problem between our Mishnah and that statement, the Braita that we raised. Okay? Why? Kan ba'achsanai, kan ba'bal habayit. Okay? Whether one were guests or the one had owned a household. And then we picked up Rav Papa Amar says Papa Haba Achsanai. Both of these might be explained in regarding the visitors. Why? Kan shehechazik b'derech. In one case, we're saying that maybe the person already set out on the road, okay, and therefore he had no time either to gather wood or to bring wood with him. Okay, kan shelo hechzik b'derech, and the other situation where one had not set out on the road already. Okay. Then we picked up Rav Zavid, right? Rav Zavir Amar, he says, le'olam keda'amar me'ikara. No, he disagrees and says, no, the explanation is better what we said originally, namely kan, okay? In one case, what are we talking about? Ba'achsanai, in terms of those that were guests that had come into the Yerushalayim to observe the holiday. Kan b'bal habayit. Here, in another case, those that had homes in Jerusalem. Va'af al gav delo hechzik b'derech. And even though one had not set out on the road already, achsanai kivan delitle, that those who were guests, because they don't necessarily bring the wood with them, asa'ahu kitsai kanin, that they made them similar to what we said was the misers, right? The Tnan, as was taught in our Mishnah, Tzaykanim sorfin oto lefnei habira b'shvil lehanot me'atzei ha'ma'aracha, where it said that the misers then burn the, let's call it, we said the minimal portion that was tameh of the offering, right? There in the bira, in the temple precinct, in order so they could benefit from the wood of the ma'aracha, the wood of the arrangement normally for the mizbeach. Okay? All right. Here's Zev and Bob. Very good. Okay. So we're about 10 lines down on Pei Bet Amud Aleph, okay, with a new Braita. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita. We learned it as follows: Bo'u l'sorfo b'chatzrotehen u'me'atzei ha'ma'aracha. If they went to burn, right, the part of the korban that we said was tameh, and they did it in their own courtyards, but you were using the wood from the Beis Hamikdash, okay? The wood ordinarily set aside, let's say, for the purpose of the Mizbeach. Ein shomin lahem. Okay, we don't listen to them. In other words, we don't pay attention to them, implying that we don't accept it. Lefnei habira umeatzei atzman, or if they were burning it there in the temple's precinct using their own wood, ein shom'in lahen. Again, we say we don't listen to them. We don't pay attention to them. We don't accept it. So the Gemara, however, points out, Bishlema me'etzei ha'ma'aracha b'chatzrotehen ein shom'in lahen. That's understandable if we're talking about wood taken from the Beis Hamikdash, right? Presumably set aside to be used on the Mizbeach, and they were burning it in their own courtyards. We don't pay attention to them. Why? Dilma Paishan, because perhaps there's something left over. Minayu. Part of the wood would be left over, right? Va'atu baho lidei tkala. And as a result, they would come to be result in some major error, a major mistake, right? You could argue that maybe they're even over on Me'ilah, okay, using the temple wood for that purpose. Ela lifnei habira me'atzei atzman maitamalo, but using their own wood, okay, and burning it inside the temple area. Okay, what's the reason we say that we don't listen to them then? So Rav Yosef Omar, says Rav Yosef, Shelo levayesh et mi she'en lo, in order not to embarrass anyone who doesn't have their own wood. Okay, that's his explanation. Rav Amar gives a different explanation. Mepnei hachshad. Why? Because we have suspicions. Okay? What suspicion could we have? Well, suspicion might be, okay, that by using their own wood, is it the right kind of wood? Or by using their own wood, okay, is it the adequate amount? Or maybe by using their own wood, we're going to say that they figure they can take wood from the temple back home. Okay? So the Gemara asks, "My beinayu," what's the difference between Rav Yosef's explanation and that of Rava? Ika beinayu da'aite kani v'charyota delo chaze lema'aracha. So the answer the Gemara gives us is we're concerned lest they bring a kind of wood like reeds or like palm branches that are not appropriate. Okay? They're not suitable or fit to be used on the ma'aracha, the arrangement for the wood for the Mizbeach. So Gemara now goes on. Tznan hata. But it's taught in our Mishnah elsewhere. Rosh Hama'amad Hayam Ma'amid et Hatme'in al Sha'ar HaMizrach. Excuse me. That the head of the Ma'amad, that was the assigned assembly, usually from the lay people. What would he do? He would assemble those, some say Kohanim, okay, who are not fit to carry out the avoda. Others want to say it was Israelites that were tamei and were waiting, for example, or a Nazir who was tamei, okay, that were waiting to have sprinkling on them, okay. So that he would set aside those who were tmeim al shar hamizrach, by the gate, right, so that they couldn't come in to the temple area. Okay? Well, my tama, what's the reasoning? Amar Rav Yosef, kadei levaishan. Why? Because it would embarrass them. Okay? If it was a Kohen that, let's say, was set aside, that he was tameh, people might wonder how come he's not doing his sacred service if it's part of his group's, assigned time period, right? Mishmar, okay? Right. However, Rava gives a different answer. Mipnei hachshad, okay? Again, because of suspicions. My beinayu, what's the difference between them here? Ika beinayu mifanke. We're having a difference between them as to those that might be pampered. Why? Inami dekagedil shishura. Or we might say that perhaps you'd have them stand there twisting ropes. Okay? In other words, it looks like they're doing a different job. And therefore, that way they wouldn't be embarrassed that they're not doing their specifically assigned job as part of that Kohen Mishmar. Okay. Now, our new Mishnah. Okay. Okay. Again, it's going to deal primarily with the status of the Korban Pesach. Matnitin, says our Mishnah, Pesach Shiatza. Okay. The Korban Pesach that went out. In other words, outside of the walls. Is that the walls of the temple precinct? Okay, or even beyond that. O shenitma, or that it became tameh, yisaref miyad, should be burnt immediately, according to this Mishnah. Nitma'u haba'alim, o shemetu. Mishnah continues, if the owners who brought, all right, who had provided that Korban Pesach, either they became tameh or they died, to ubar tsurato. We said that means that the korban, the offering, has to change its form. In other words, it has to be left to decay. Right? V'yisaref b'shisha asar. And then it would be burnt on the 16th day of the month. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, he says, Afzeh yisaref miyad. That also should be burnt immediately. Why? Lafisha ein lo ochlin. Because there's no one that's going to be eating it if the Korban Pesach was either outside the walls or completely tameh. Gemara says, Bishlema tameh. We understand that's acceptable when we say that the Korban Pesach has become tameh. Why? K'tiv. Because we have a pasuk that tells us, V'habasar asher yiga b'chol tameh lo yechel be'esh yisaref. The meat that has become tameh, it cannot be eaten, it must be burnt. Right? So that answers part of the Mishnah. Eliyotze minalan, but how is to say that the same applies to when the Korban Pesach has gone outside the walls? Dichtiv. We have another pasuk. Hein lohu va et dama el hakodesh panima, where the pasuk says that the blood was not brought into the area inside of the Kodesh, implying that the Kodesh is the area temple precinct. Amar lo, he said to Moshe li'Aharon, continuing then on this Braita, in that situation, right? Madua lo achaltem et chatat. Why didn't you eat the chatat? Okay, remember this is conversation occurring in the Torah was during the days of the establishment of the Mishkan. Okay. Shema nichnas dama lefnei v'lefnim. Is it possible that the blood was brought inside? Amar lo la. Aaron responds, no. Amar lo, Moshe again, Shema chutz l'mechitzata yatzta. Maybe it was brought outside its boundaries. In other words, outside perhaps the kla'im, the curtains on the farthest boundaries of the Mishkan. Amar lo lav, b'kodesh haita. Okay, no, he said it was inside the Mishkan area. Amar lo, he said to him, I b'kodesh haita. Okay, if it was inside the sacred area, vehein lo huva et dama, and we say, right, el hakodesh panima, and you say that it was the blood was not brought into the internal sections of the building of the Mishkan. Madua lo achaltem ota. Why didn't you eat it? Miklal de'i nafka. From here we learn the general principle that if it went out, inami ayil dama lifnim, then also the blood would have to have been brought inside. Bat sreifahi, and therefore, if that's the case, that sprinkling does not apply, and therefore the piece of meat has to be burnt. So the Gemara now responds to that whole braita. Bishlema nitma. If it's understandable when we say it's become tamei. Gali rachmana b'kadoshim kalim. Kol shekain b'kodshei kadoshim. If the Torah gave us that, revealed that implication for lesser holy things, how much more so for the more holy things? Ela yotzei, but rather when we're talking about going out, ishkachan kodshei hakadoshim. Okay, I find it therefore a chatat, right, which is among the kodshei kadoshim, a higher sanctity item. So I find it applying to that. Kodshim kalin minalan, but lesser holy things. How do we know? For two, and furthermore, hadetanya lan dama, here where the Braita taught that the blood was left over, right? What happens as we go over? Nishpach dama. Okay, does that seem to be similar to a situation when the blood gets spilled? Yatsa dama chutz l'kla'im. That's implying that the blood happened outside the curtains. Dekaimelan b'sreifa, the fact that we say and establish this, that it must be handled through burning, minalan, on what basis? Nafkalan amida Rabbi Shimon. This is derived from something of Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, as taught in the Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says as follows: B'kodesh b'esh tisaref. So darshaning the pasuk, right? That in the holy it should be burnt. Limeid al chatat shesreifata b'kodesh. It teaches us that regarding the chatat, its burning is in the sanctified area. Ainli elezo bilvad. That seems only to apply to it itself only. Sha'ar psule kodshe kadoshim. Any other invalid most holy offerings. Ve'imurei kodshim kalim. And those items offered on the Mizbeach from lesser holy items, minalan, minayan, how do we know this? Talmud Lomar, says the pasuk, v'chol b'kodesh b'esh tisaref, implying that anything that's brought into the sacred area must be burnt by fire. So the Gemara now tells us, Ashkechan kadshe kadoshim. Okay, so now I find an answer applying to most holy objects. Kodshim kalin minalan, lesser holy offerings. On what basis? Ella rather, Kol psulo b'kodesh b'sreifa, implying that any invalidity with something that is brought into the sacred space must be burnt. Lo shna kodshim kalim, there's no difference between lesser holy items, velo shna kodshe kadoshim, nor any difference between higher holy items. Gemara gemirale, we have a Masorah, a tradition that teaches us. V'chatat da'aron mishum ma'aseh dahaya, kach haya. And the incident, of trying to base it on the example of the chatas in the days of establishing the Mishkan, that was a unique incident, right? Because of the fact of the death of Aaron's sons, kach haya, and therefore they can't use that example to learn from and apply in our case. So Gemara picks up and continues and tells us, Ulatana debe Rava bar Abuha, and according to the Tana of the Academy of Rava bar Abuha, who says, Afilu pigul ta'un ibur tzura, that even when we have a situation of pigul, where there was misintent on the part of Kohen, thus resulting in the korban being not valid, that also needs ibur tzura, a change of its form, to be allowed to decay. Minalan, on what basis? Yalif avon minota. Maybe we should learn Gezerah Shava, based on the word avon, from the one example of nota, what's meat that's left over from a korban, to pigul. So the Gemara then says, V'nilaf avon mechatat ha'aro. So maybe then we should learn the Gezerah Shava, again the word avon, from the example of the chatas offering that we had before in the situation of Aaron. Right? Amar lach chatat da'aharon, that when we talk about that specific case of the chatas of Aaron, ki hai gavna, nami ibur tzura ledorot bae. In that example, that would have needed a change of form to allow to be decayed for other generations. In other words, that would have set up an example for further cases. Vahatam hora'at sha'ah haita. And there, in that case, it was only a temporary edict, a temporary ruling, given the specific situation of Aharon in the case. Hashta da amrinin kol psilei. Now that we say that all of the psulei de kodesh b'sreifa, that any kind of invalidity regarding the offerings, whether we said it was kodshe kalim or kodshe kadoshim, should be dealt with through fire. Lo shna de kodshe kadoshim, v'lo shna kodshim kalim. Then we make no difference between higher offerings and less holy offerings. Gemara Gamirala. Why? Because we have a Masorah, a tradition that teaches Bakodesh Ba'esh Tisaref. If that's the case, we have this tradition on the Pasuk. Why then do we really need the Pasuk? Lamali. Gemara tells us, Hahu mibayele, we need the Pasuk, Shesrefata Bakodesh. Why? To tell us that this burning has to be done in the sacred area. So the Gemara continues, Vahabasar, asher yiga b'chol tameh, lo yechel ba'esh yisoref, lamali. But if then we have another pasuk that says that any meat that has contact with tuma cannot be eaten and should be burnt. Why do I need that pasuk then? Hahula gufe itztarich. That pasuk is needed for itself, for its own purpose. Salka da'atcha amina, because it's possible I might have thought as follows. Kol psule de kodesh, kigon lan dama, any kind of invalidity to items brought into the sacred area. For example, a situation where its blood stayed over. V'nishpach dama, or the blood got spilt. V'yatsa dama v'nishchata balayla, or one carried out the blood, okay, and the animal was slaughtered at night. The b'sreifa, okay, in this case regarding burning, delete naho bechulin, okay, that we say that it doesn't apply with regards to chulin, non-consecrated items. Aval nitma, but when it becomes tameh, the bechulin nami mafsil, that there in that case, if it's tameh, even unconsecrated items becomes into the category of being invalid. Ema ho'il ve'it abid be'ovdin. I'm going to say that since in that case it's possible that one is going to carry out sacred service with it, dechol, on a weekday, ema lo tebayis reifa. Shall I say then that it doesn't require burning, right? V'tiske la bikvura, and therefore it would be sufficient simply to bury it. Kamash malan comes to teach us that that's not the case, and that therefore even initially unconsecrated items that were brought as offerings on weekdays, nevertheless, if they're tameh, they too have to be burnt. Now, all of that dealt, we said, with the tuma of the korban. What about the tuma of the owners? Nitma'u haba'alin o shemetu te'ubar tzuratan v'chule. Okay. The owners became tameh or they died. Do we simply allow the korban pesach to rot and become decayed? Amar Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef, machloket shenitma'u ba'alim achar zrika. The argument is that what happens when the owners become tameh after they've already sprinkled the blood. De'ichaze basar la'achila, because at that point the meat is already fit for eating. Aval nitma'u ba'alim lefnei zrika. But if the owners became tameh before they sprinkled the blood, delo itchaze basar la'achila, when the meat is not fit or suitable to be eating, divrei hakol yisaref miyad. Everybody agrees that it should be burnt immediately. This is what Rav Yosef is arguing. But the Gemara tells us meitive. We bring a challenge to this through a braita. Zeh haklal. This is the general rule. Kol shepsulo begufo yisaref miyad. When there is an invalidity in regarding the essence of the korban itself, it's burnt immediately. Badam, if the pasul, the invalidity, applies to the blood, okay, uba'alim, or in the owners, to uvar tzurato, it should be allowed to decay, change its form. V'yetzei lebeit hasrifa, and then afterwards brought out to a place of burning. So the Gemara now says, Katane ba'alim dumya dadam. This Braita seems to teach that the status of the owners is similar to the status of the blood. Ma dam lifnei zrika, af ba'alim lifnei zrika. The same status of the blood before its sprinkling, so likewise the status of the owners before sprinkling. Ela I itmar hachi itmar. But if that was said, this is what means to be said. Machloket shenitma'u ba'alim lefnei zrika. The argument is about the fact that the owners became tameh before the sprinkling. Delo itchazeh basar le'achila. Because then the meat is not suitable or fit to be eaten. Dahava le kipsulo begufo. Because that then is like an invalidity in the essence of the korban itself. Aval nitma'u ba'alim la'achar zrika. But if the owners became tameh after the sprinkling, va'idchazeh basar la'achila, and the meat has become suitable for eating, divrei hakol psulo mechamat davar acher. Then everybody is in agreement that the invalidity is due to a different cause. Uba'e ibur tzura, and therefore it requires a change of form, the meat to be allowed to be decayed and then brought to be burnt. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says as follows: Af la'achar zrika nami machloket. He says the machloket, however, also occurs after sprinkling of the blood. Va'az the Rabbi Yochanan l'ta'ameh, and Rabbi Yochanan followed his line of logic. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Rabbi Nechemia, the two of them, Amru davar echad, they said the same thing. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Hada Amran. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka said, as we've indicated. Rabbi Nechemia, Ma'ihi detanya, and Rabbi Nechemia, what is it that he taught in a Braita? Ma Rabbi Nechemia Omer, he says, Mipnei aninut sreifazo. Okay, that burning was because of the status of their being onei. Lakach ne'amar ka'ela. For that reason, it said like this. Okay, Vaha aninut kila achar zrikahavya. Is it possible that they would have the status of aninut after the sprinkling? Vaki esrof la'alter. Why? Because if we have to burn it, it needs to be burnt immediately. Right? Nisrof. Let's go over a bit on Metpeh Gimel. Rabba Mosif. And Rabba then add, Af Rabbi Yossi Haglili. And even Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Detanya, taught in a Braita. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, he says, Kol inyan kulo, eino medavar ela beparim hanisrafin ubesi'irim hanisrafin. All of this discussion was only focused on the issue of those kinds of offerings, the parim and the seirim that were both totally burnt. Lesrof psulehen abeit habira. That if they became tameh, or they became invalid, then they would be burnt in the bira, in the area of the temple. V'litain lo ta'aseh al achilatan, and therefore to teach us that there is a prohibition, a lav, in regards to their being eaten. Amrulo. Now the sages said, however, to Rabbah, Chatat shenichnas dama lefanai v'lefnim. What about a situation of the chatas, where its blood came inside. Minayin, how do we know there too that has to be burnt? Amar lahan, he said to them, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Hein lohu va etama el hakodesh pnima. We have a pasuk that says that they shall not have their blood brought, right, further from inside, from to the sacred area, meaning brought from outside. Miklau de inafek ihi, implying the general rule that if it was outside, okay, inami, or perhaps ayil dama, or they brought simply the blood, bisrefa, it has to be dealt with by fire. For Rabbi Yochanan Savar, dam ubasar chada miltahi. And Rabbi Yochanan, however, felt that the blood and the meat was one item, right? Ba'alim milta acharitahi, and that issues regarding the owners, that was a different item, and therefore it was a different halacha. Okay, now we're going to stop right there for today. Okay, I know that tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so the question somebody asked me was whether or not we should start a drop later tomorrow. Okay, that's why I went over to this up to the Mishnah here. Do we think that we can, if we started at 8:45, do we think that we can still get to finish by 9:30?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right. So that's what we'll do.
Anyhow,
Now the Chumash group is going to join in about 9:30 to be able to have their shiur. So some of them, if they join in a little bit earlier, they'll wind up hearing the end of the daf. That's all. Okay.
we were told also, usually when the women have their minyan, we get cut off.
Right. So that won't happen this time
It won't
because
happen this time, but I said if we can't get on with the Chumash class, we should log in into the Mishnah, into yours, to the Daf Yomi.
right, and you should anyway, because they'll put the Chumash class on the same Zoom subscription
Yeah.
as the daf is, and give the women the other one, and that way shouldn't be the problem. Okay? Especially since even if the Chumash class runs a little bit later, after 10 o'clock, there's no problem because there is no 10 o'clock shiur on Friday mornings. All right?
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, so
Have a
even
good
if we
day.
run a drop late, it should work out for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, thank you for your participation. Stay well and take care, everybody.